Good morning, everybody. Again, thank you for choosing our webinar to join when you have so many choices out there these days. Today, we are going to be talking about the system patch within the Spyder Studio and Christie Advanced user interface. Let me pull up something very quickly. So you think after 5 webinars, I'm getting better at this? Not really. Here we go. So because of something else here, bear with me. I'd like everybody, so the system patch, I'm just gonna do a quick slide and then I'll dive right into the GUI. The system patch is a panel within the user interface that allows you to get to change the parameters or settings for any of these 3 items. Okay, and it's kind of like a very kind of a crude line diagram of the association between layers, pixel spaces, and outputs. You'll see, and we'll go through each of these in some detail. The outputs has probably the most settings, and we'll go through these when I toggle to the interface. But basically, you can define resolution, area of responsibility, all of the video settings, color space, chroma settings, edge blending tools, black level tools, test pattern generators. All of these items are in the system patch output settings. So let me toggle back over there real quick. Okay, so here's our interface. I've kind of, if you've been watching any of these previous ones, I've worked with a blend and things like that, but I've kind of changed this one a little bit. So I have just a left screen, I have a main screen, and then I have a right screen, and then two ones down below them. And everything basically is set to basically 1920 by 1080, but this is an array of 1920 by 1080. So a 3x2 array, 5760 by 2160 be the total resolution. But with that being said, as we move down to the system patch, which is this tab right here in the lower right corner, we'll go ahead and just kind of look at this. Now, as you notice, if I click on a source, the property panel to the far right is contextual, meaning if I click on a source, it gives me the source properties. If I click on a pixel space, it gives me pixel space properties. If I click on a command key, it gives me those properties. So whatever I click on, that's what it's going to talk about, or that's what it's going to show me. So as I go into the system patch, and I'm going to start from the right side and move across to the left, you'll see outputs on the right. You'll see pixel spaces in the center and layers on the left, and it kind of shows the layers from top down. So a higher number layer at the top, and there's a setting that you can invert that if you want. And then you see lines that are basically being drawn from a pixel space to an output, right? Showing that pixel space is being driven by these specific outputs. And then you'll see, so like main screen here has outputs, lines drawn to outputs 1 through 6, okay? And notice it also has, those outputs have lines being drawn down to the all program, because those outputs are also feed part of that pixel space, because all program is a pixel space, right? So that's just kind of why you see this kind of spider-like web. If I throw some sources on here, you'll start seeing some lines being drawn from the layer side, right? So I dragged a couple layers on there, and they show you get a little sense of the area of interest and the red dot there for whether or not it's in program or preview. But starting with the outputs, okay? One thing to remember, I'll just go ahead and click on output 1, and I'll just collapse this tab here. There are 6 tabs in the output settings. General, video options, edge blending, black levels, test pattern, and advanced. You may go into these, some of these every time you go in here, others you may never touch. It really kind of depends on what you're doing. But one thing to remember is I toggle another slide real quick. This is a quick, remember, outputs have different modes, they have different capabilities. So every output board has 4 outputs, and what those outputs can do really kind of depends on which output you're connecting to. So a quick recap of all the different modes. Remember the normal mode, which is where you map an output to a pixel space, right? Just part of an area of responsibility. That's available. That mode is capable on every output on that board. The next one in yellow is the aux. Okay, aux directly routes a source to an output that doesn't require a layer or doesn't write it to the canvas, doesn't write it to a pixel space. So, and this is also the least amount of latency in the system is this direct route from an aux. So those aux is also available on every output. And the nice thing about that is that it will scale that source to that output, right? So if it's a HD source going to a 4K output, it'll scale it up. If it's a 4K source going to a 1080p output, it'll scale it down. So you don't have to worry about that. It is a hard switch every time you change that, but just keep that in mind. Now, the next one is MST, and I may toggle back to this slide a couple times. That one is only available on the first two outputs, okay? Meaning not capable on the third and fourth, okay? MST is multi-stream transport. It utilizes DisplayPort to be able to take a single UHD feed and break it into 4 separate 1080p feeds. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute. So that way you could drive 4 monitors, right? Or drive four signals to, say, an LED processor from one single output from the Spyder, okay? Scaled output is another mode that's been with us from the beginning, right? All the way back to 200 and 300 series. Basically, we'll scale any pixel space down to a single resolution to a single output. So if I want to take a wide screen or something like that, and I can say, I want to monitor this pixel space on a single 1080p monitor, you can do that. That mode is only available on the last 2 outputs, 3 and 4. So keep that in mind. I'm talking like with my hands a lot here, I'm sorry. Then there's the multi-viewer, right? We're gonna have our next webinar on Wednesday will be about the multi-viewer. So I suspect that'll be a pretty popular one. But that's where you can kind of customize your utility view, right? So whether it's program and preview or program and some inputs or an output and some inputs, you'll see how we go through that. That mode is available only on the 4th output. So depending on how your Spyder is equipped, for every output board, you have at least 1 multi-viewer, okay? So if you have fully populated 2416, you got 4 output boards, that means 4 multi-viewers. So that's a quick recap on the output modes. So now if we go back and as I start touching on these, I'll click on the first output. So you'll see we get general, video options, edge blending and black levels, and test patterns in advance. I'm just gonna go ahead and start collapsing each one of these. So the general tab, you'll see there's an output name, right? That's the label that you see right here on the output. I could call this Peter's output, right? And notice when I do that, it changes it right here and calls it Peter's output. Also, it's prompting me to, anytime I make a change to an output, it's prompting me to save it. Now, in some of the older versions, it would blink a little bit more predominantly, but in here, you just basically get a little orange notification saying a save is required for that to stick. So if I don't want that to stick, I can just click cancel and it'll revert back, okay? The connector type, which connector type do we want to use on output 1? We hit the drop down button menu, we get HDMI, DisplayPort, or SDI. So with HDMI, you get, with each of these connectors, you get different settings. So in HDMI mode, you get this transmission mode. So it's either DVI or HDMI. So if you're using converter cables or something like that, or an LED processor only accepts DVI, you might opt to slide that little menu over to the DVI side, right? So you just have that option to go either way. If I were to choose DisplayPort, right? Now I get MST options, where if it's turned off normally, but I now can go a 1x2, a 1x3. So we're taking a single output and basically using an off-the-shelf MST hub, and we can share in the post so a couple of ones that we're familiar with and that we like. But basically anything off the shelf that would take that UHD signal, break it into 4 separate outputs, and now we could drive, say, a flat panel array. Instead of using 6 outputs to drive this flat panel array, we could use 2 in order to do that, right? So going back here to MST. So let's say instead of outputs 1 through 6, I wanted to drive this wall with 2 MST outputs, okay? What I could do is then go go right here to output 1, change it to a 3x1, okay? And then I would choose the resolution, right? And what I want to do is, what I'm determining is I'm determining the output of each individual output, not the main resolution we're outputting out of that one connector. It's going to be what is it going to be broken into, okay? So I would choose 1080, right? So I could do 1080 or less, basically, based on the bandwidth. So notice now I choose that, I hit apply, and it shows a 3x1 array. If I were to choose something like a 1x3, you see the different orientation. There is no adjustment for overlap or bezel compensation in MST. So right now it's all just butted arrays. So 3x1, 2x1, 4x1, or 2x2, or the inverse of those others, okay? So just keep that in mind. And when I say okay, now you can see, now it's using a single output at showing the resolution of each of those, and then it shows the area of responsibility for that, okay? Now, if I go to, well, let's go ahead and check. Let's go ahead and do 2 as well. I'll go ahead and change that to display port, do a 3x1. And all I need to do is just make sure I map it to the correct area. Now, if I go down here, sorry, 3x1, I want the horizontal start to be 1936. I had to do the math in my head there. And I want it to start vertically at 1080. So now that output is going to start right below that first output. I hit save, and I'm good. Now, I still have these other outputs currently mapped there, but if I unplug them, I don't have to worry about it. But I basically turned on the overlay in here so you can see where each output is being used. But if I were to turn these off, actually, let's just put them in this mode real quick. Anyway, so that's the display port section, right? Sorry, display port. The last one here is SDI, and it's really saying, you get prompted anytime you turn this on, is that if you enable output, your SDI connectors on your outputs, you have to be conscious of HDCP. So, and in Spyder, basically what we do is if you enable HDCP on your Spyder, we disable the SDI outputs altogether, right? So the only active output would be either DisplayPort or HDMI. SDI would be disabled whenever you enable HDCP. So this is the warning. It's just telling you that it needs to be disabled or it will be disabled. But other than that, let me close this back to DisplayPort, save. If I go down below and I scroll down here and as I move on beyond the connector types, you'll see there's modes here. Normal versus aux. So this is output 1. That's showing you the modes that output 1 supports. If I hover over this little information button, it says, hey, multi-viewer is only available on the 4th output. Scaled available is only available on the 3rd and 4th output, so I can't use those modes. If I were to click on the 3rd, I can come over here and you'll see it gives me some additional warnings that what's available and what's not. Okay. Go back up here. Rotation. Any output can be rotated in 90 degrees. Okay, not an MST output, but a standard regular normal mode output can rotate in 90, 180, or 270 degrees. Be cautious about this. This does affect, if you think, well, maybe not so much in studio anymore, but it does affect the vertical height of your canvas when you rotate something, especially something like UHD. Now your height's going to be 3840 or 4096, depending on what you're running your outputs at. The rotation doesn't exist. It does exist, and it's only on the outputs. Rotation, only on the outputs. Did I say rotation is only on the outputs, not on the inputs? Okay, just want to make sure that's clear. So next you find the H and V start for each output, okay? If I were to click on any output, so if I were to look at this lower LCD or even the DSMs down here, I'll just scroll down. And it looks like I chose number 11 here. You can see that the H start is 1936, which is right here. And the V start is 2160, which is right below our thing. So we can always just tell where we want that output to be mapped. In the color configuration, this is where you can adjust the color space. This is where you can adjust the chroma sampling, okay? Color range, either full or limited, okay? HDR, we support HLG as far as HDR on the outputs go. And then on the outputs, we will support 8, 10, or 12-bit on the outputs. Even though the canvas either runs at 8 or 12, we allow the outputs to run at 10-bit as long as the VI is running at 12-bit, okay? So keep that in mind. So that's the general tab under the outputs. If we move down, there's basic video levels right here that you can adjust for hue, saturation, brightness, contrast, and gamma. You've got timing settings here. This is for flat panel arrays when you have vertical arrays where you can adjust the timing so you don't get this lag in layers as they go back and forth, okay? That adjustment, I believe, is turned on automatically, but if you need to adjust it, you can always do it from there. Edge blending, we talked about this in our first new configuration menu, where if you have a blend, this is where you're adjusting either the left or right edge that you'll be blending internally. But this is the setting for it. You just basically enable the right or left edge, and then you set the overlap and everything from there. Black levels. If you're doing black level blending, another blending topic, this is where you would adjust the non-blended areas and elevate those black levels to match what the blended area is. Usually that's reserved for dark content or just when you want to try to eliminate the visibility of the banding that you would see in a blended display. Let's see here. Beyond that, test patterns. So every output you can generate an internal test pattern. So you've got quite a bit of options here. You've got color bars, color fields, and as you click on them, you can kind of see a little representation down here. And then for color bars, you have 3 different types. If I were to pick color fields, you've got 8-bit ramps, different things like that. But so say something like a grid, right? Now I can turn on these options down below, whether I want a 32 by 32, a 64 by 64, and if I want to turn on these options for an outline, a center zero, or a crosshatch, if I'm going to do a blend, I want to make sure that my projectors are converged properly. This is where I can go ahead and do that and just simply click apply. Now you don't see them virtually, but you would see them directly get loaded to the outputs for their corresponding area. The nice thing about the test patterns, one quick thing, is that you can put a test pattern on anything in the patch, on an output, on a pixel space, or on a layer. So it's very handy if you want to, say, apply a pattern to this grid pattern to a layer, and you want to go check a certain area of the LED wall. Just apply it to the layer and just say, I'll go right here, select that, go put on a test pattern for that real fast. Say we do a grid, put on all the fixings here, say apply. Now, it's going to be hard to see here because in virtual mode, you don't see the actual pattern, but you could move that around to different areas and see if everything was converged. If it was off a pixel vertically or horizontally, you could kind of just move that pattern around and see if it would and flush out any of those issues. Back to the output here. The last one is the advanced tab, right? So this is where you're going to find all the timings, right? Any adjustments. You can go in and manually make adjustments here, but again, you want to be cautious because these are set to, SMPTE standards. Everything's calculated through that. So just be cautious in making changes in here because it may affect if your output is going to be locked to the VI or not. Okay, so if you change timings or something like that, or change the refresh rate versus what the refresh rate of the pixels of the canvas is, you want to be cautious for that. So anything here in the outputs, you can change from the system patch. Notice down below there is a wrench right down here on output 12. Okay, output 12. That wrench, if I were to right click, basically that wrench signifies that is my configuration output. It's kind of hard to see, but it says set as configuration output, and that means when we talk about sources and we start bringing in sources, we're going to designate that particular monitor to show that source with a raster, so I can make adjustments and see if it's clean, if it's the one I'm supposed to be looking at, if there's any issues, the right color space or anything like that. That time, that's the output. Wherever that wrench is that's the one where I'm going to be able to review that. Now that's typically always going to be on your multi-viewer. It doesn't get automatically assigned, whereas in advanced, it used to get automatically assigned to your operator monitor. But here you can assign it to any output. So you just want to make sure you right click. If I want to say I want to put it on, we're here, right? 16. I have 16 as my multi-viewer. I can just say set as configuration output, and it'll just simply move that wrench down to that particular output. Okay. It has to be one of the 4 multi-viewer outputs. That's the trick there. Okay. It has to be one of those. Other than that, that's pretty much it for outputs in the system patch. Let's see, pixel spaces. So here we get basically starting from left to right, top to bottom, we get to see all of our pixel spaces. Now here, there's not a ton of information for the pixel spaces other than their horizontals, their name, right? The ID number, which is significant because same with the outputs. Everything has an ID number, and a lot of things in Spyder are 0-based. So output 1 is ID. If I click on output 1 here, output 1 is ID 0, right? Output 4, ID 3. 6 is 5, and so on and so forth. The first pixel space you create is ID 0. So house left here would be ID 0. Its preview is listed as 5 because we have 4 pixel spaces. Actually, I take that back. Why? So this is 0. The program main screen is 1, and then widescreen is right, and then 4, and then the all program is 100. So it automatically assigned the preview of those to 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? But I can look at those. I can see their position in the canvas in the VI. I can see their dimensions right here. So if you're ever trying to, someone wants to know what's the dimension of that pixel space, you just click on it, go to the property panel, and that'll tell you the dimensions. If I scroll down to the next area in the pixel space settings, you'll see there's backgrounds. Okay. Backgrounds, you can load a background to any pixel space. You can load 2, one to the program and one to the preview, or 1 current and 1 next. That's the best way to think about that. So notice I've got, if I go and click on the main screen here, it shows my current background is this color, right? This blue. The next background right here, which would represent the preview area, is black, right? There is no black background. You'll see that you can mix the background right here using this button and kind of dissolve them all together. Now you can only mix, you have to mix all the backgrounds together, but you could just basically crossfade between the two based on the duration setting, okay? But if I wanted a different image, I could just click on that, find an image in here. Let's see here. I'm not gonna dig too deep. Widescreen, let's pick something like, now keep in mind, I'm gonna pick something that's a little, maybe not quite the same aspect ratio. I'll use something here, and whoever watches this will know who generated this image. But notice it fits it into that pixel space, and even though the image itself was a different resolution, it squished and stretched it into the pixel space that you loaded into. So one of the things you want to remember when you're loading backgrounds to pixel spaces is make sure that at the very least they're the same aspect ratio so they don't get altered. But more importantly, and probably more accurately, you want them the same resolution. If somebody's going to be creating graphics for you, go ahead and just have them make it at 5760 by 2160 or whatever the pixel space is, and that way it's a native pixel for pixel image. But then I could load a different one down here, and now notice if I re-click on that, I got the Jeep up here. I'm going to go ahead and load one into preview, and I'll just use this other Jeep that we have, and it'll stretch it into that one, okay? And now I can just kind of crossfade by clicking on these and go back and forth between those two backgrounds. So the current, when it references right here, the current background, that's based on whichever one I click on. So if I click on the program, it's saying the current background for that is the Jeep Wagoneer. The next background, which is in preview, would be the other one that's named Everyman Challenge, right? So keep that in mind as far as backgrounds go, okay? There is also a feature on the pixel space that you can turn on what we call titling. So this is something that's probably used more in fixed installations for command and control rooms, network operation centers, things like that, where they have a bunch of information on the screen, a bunch of different windows. And what this does is I don't have the ability to show you what the label looks like in the simulator, but what it'll do, it will append, 2 seconds, Joel, it will append the label to the layer if I enable it, but it's a pixel space function. So I would have to enable a specific pixel space right here and say, all right, every time a layer hits this pixel space, go ahead and put the label up there. Yeah, Joel.
Background images and video. Highlight about what we can do with video and still images in the background layers.
Gotcha. So there, right there, that background doesn't require a layer, right? It's a still image. It can't be a video source in that capacity, right? Let me turn this back off here for a second. So if I go back to look at backgrounds, notice there's no way to import a video into that. And just remember that Spyder, it's a video processor. It's not a media server, right? So it's not meant to ingest content and play it back. So therefore, I cannot choose a video for this particular pixel space. The only thing I can do is I can load it to a couple of layers, right? Say I've got these two layers over here to the left, PB Dual 1 and PB Dual 2. And if I were to go ahead and load these to the correct pixel space, what I could do is say, why don't we fill the screen with these? This is meant to be a left side and a right side, okay? You do have to use layers, okay? Can't get around that. You have to use layers. So you would use the two most upstream layers or the lower number layers so that everything that comes out over the top of it would be visible. One thing we have implemented just recently in the latest version is that we have the ability to lock this layer. So if I were to select that layer and go either over here in the script window to layer 1, right? Or into the system patch, scroll down here and go to layer 1, I can right click and say lock. And you're gonna notice that little dog ear there that shows the layer number is grayed out. And I'll do the same thing for 2. Now, actually, before I do that, let me unlock this real quick. Just whoops. That's another feature. Hang on. So here's the thing about this though. If I wanted to introduce a new source to that pixel space just by dragging it from the screen, from the source list, the problem is if I drag it right here, it's going to replace wherever my cursor, whatever layer my cursor is hovering over. Well, that's not what I want, and that can be a pain in the butt because then I have to right click, add a layer, then figure out what source I want, and then drop it on it. Better to do this, I can go, let's choose layer 1 here, lock, okay, and you'll see the little lock icon. I'll do the same thing for layer 2. Ah, dang it. Lock. There we go. So now those are locked. You see the little lock key right here, and I can't even move that now. See? If I try to move that layer, I can't do anything. Even if I click on it, I get pixel space information, okay? This means now I can drag new sources directly on there without having to put it somewhere else and then move it in. So this is nice to be able to, if you needed to do a video background, this is probably a long answer for a relatively short question, but just because I know that's weighing on a lot of people's mind when they want to do graphics, video graphics in the background, how do we handle that? Short answer is you got to use layers to do it. But now we can lock them down and make them a little more friendly to add new content. Yeah, Joe.
And just to add, Peter, now we can ingest a wider, like a 7680 width on a single channel with specific parameters in the VI. So now you don't need it to have 2 layers. You can just use one layer.
Yeah, it kind of depends. Now, it depends on the pixel space dimensions and what you're trying to drive, right? So we have this thing called 8K wide inputs, okay? 8K wide inputs, not 8K inputs, okay? So you can actually go in to an input, and this is more source specific, and we're gonna have another webinar on that. But we have the ability to do a single input at 7680 wide by 1080 tall, okay? Kind of like the MST, as far as resolution goes, but there are parameters for that. If I wanted to go in here, let's say I'm gonna add a new source real quick. Let's call this 8K wide. This is gonna come in on DisplayPort, has to be on DisplayPort, on input 1, and I'm gonna configure this source real fast. It's going to take a second. I can go in here to load a standard, go Visa, and I should be able to do 7680 by 1080 and apply. And you can see it right there, save. So now the idea here is that I have to come out of this mode now. I'm going to come out of that mode. Save. Oh, sorry. Exit. So now I can bring the source out, and it is on layer 1, which I don't want to lock. Bear with me. Let's put that on a different layer. So now I have a source that's 7680 by 1080. Now the rule of this is, in order to make this happen, your VI can't be taller than 2160. There's certain processing capabilities that need to be kept in check. So we can't do 8K wide inputs, and it's a sliding scale. If you need, if it's not as wide, you can get more height out of your VI. So the narrower it is, kind of like the canvas, the narrower it is, the taller it can be. So between the 8K wide input and the MST outputs, if anybody came to Infocom a couple years ago, where we showcased the MST and these two features, we had a 4x1 array of flat panels being driven by a single DisplayPort output. We had a Pandora server, quad server, 4 channels, 3 of them coming out 3840 by 2160, and the 4th coming out 7680 by 1080, driving that wall with 1 input and 1 output. So a very good way to take advantage of these features and reduce the number of inputs and outputs that you're using, as long as some of those parameters you can live with some of those rules. Okay. We kind of diverged from the patch here for a second, but let me go back here. Looking at titling, we're talking about titling, how it'll apply a layer to, a label to the layer. Test pattern generator, and then the advanced tab is just a quick summary of what those are. Now I go to click on layers, and you'll see if I click on layer 24, it's going to give me all of this stuff, right? Source, input config, keyframe, border, borders and shadows, test patterns, and advanced. All of those things. Again, that's how I get to the properties of any particular layer, pixel space, or output is through the system patch, right? Or at least one way to get to it is that it's the most handy and the most consistent way. Again, anything that I were to go in here, if I have a layer on the screen, I can get to the layer properties, right? I got to unlock those layers because I can't take them off now. But just keep that in mind. Whew, I feel like I've been talking really fast for a long time. Joel, help me. I've touched on a lot of this stuff. I can see some questions. You're muted.
So a lot of questions kind of referring to the background images and layers and things like that. You know, you start clicking around, you're revealing a lot of capabilities there. A great question is can you control the pixel space separate from another to mix backgrounds? And what is the behavior when you're mixing the background images?
When you're mixing backgrounds, when you're mixing backgrounds, you mix them all together. You can't independently mix backgrounds within a pixel, between, like I can't just mix the main pixel space here and not the other ones. That background, they all have to mix together, right? So I find pretty consistently that I see live event type of folks, they will keep, I'll just go ahead and say no background on this one. They'll keep the preview areas, sorry, let me do that one. They'll keep the preview area full, they'll load like corporate logos, right, into each screen. So, pick a corporation and they'll say, company XYZ and their logo on these preview pixel spaces, but they'll keep the program areas black because many times they're using a media server to drive live background content. It's not, that way if something were to happen to the content or something like that and they couldn't present that video content, they could simply just mix off the layers and transition the backgrounds to a static image to the pixel spaces and still have something on the screen. So again, long answer to a relatively short question. You cannot independently mix backgrounds on each pixel space. They all have to mix together, and that's regardless of what version of Spyder you're using. Okay. I'm going to look at some of these other questions here. I think they're all answered. Can you use a source as a background? I think I covered that pretty well. You just have to load it to a layer, right? And then you can lock the layer to prevent, swapping, switching it inadvertently. Now, as I go through, yeah, Joel.
Show how we can duplicate outputs in the patch.
Duplicate outputs, yes. So a nice, cool feature in the patch is that you can drag and drop properties from one output to another, okay? With the understanding that that output can support whatever you're trying to drag to it, right? So if I were to go and say, maybe I wanted output 1 and output 5 to look at the same area, right? I could take output 1, I'm gonna left click and hold, and I'm gonna drag down, and I'm gonna drop it on 5. Boom, and you'll see that it replicated resolution, format, and position all on that other output. Now notice it also says say required, okay? If I didn't want that to happen, I can simply hit cancel, or if I did want that to happen, just hit save, okay? So you can copy functions from one output to another. If say you want your multi-viewer to be the same on output 12 as it is on 16, I can take 12, drag it up to, I'm sorry, output 16 and drag it up to 12, and it's going to replicate that function right there. Okay. And of course, it pops up in my multi-viewer menu. So very easy to copy. It's not really a copy and paste function, it's a drag and drop function. So I'll call it a drag and save. That's what you're doing when you're changing modes there. Another shortcut in the system patch, if we talk about some of these modes real quick, is, let me put this back out of these aux modes here. I'll talk about aux next as well. But say, if anybody goes back to the advanced software, there were shortcuts in there to create an opmon, right? An operator monitor, which is program and preview, all program and all preview. The shortcut for that is to take any pixel space in the patch, right, in the center, and drag it to the output that you want the opmon to be on. So I can take main screen right here, drag it to output 4. It's gonna call me a liar, dang it. You used to be able to do that. Save. Well, tell you what, let me show you something. Let me show you something. Sit tight, folks. I'm gonna show you something here. Let me pull this up, okay? So this is advanced. And almost everything with the exception of MST and aux and all that is the same down here in the system patch. You click on an output, you get all the same properties, all the same tabs and everything. But say I wanted output 4 to be my operator monitor. I could take this output, just simply drag it right here, boom, and it'll change the mode of that. And if I look at it and go over here to general, you see now it's in opmon mode, right? So that's a quick shortcut in advanced. I'll find out what's up with Studio, but you should be able to drag a pixel space to an output and it makes an operator monitor, okay? Now, the trick is you go the other direction, you take an output and drag it to a pixel space, that will create a scaled output, okay? So if say I want output 4 to only show me the main screen in this configuration, right? Well, I can take this, click on output 4, drag it to the main screen, and you'll see right here, now it's in scaled mode, looking at that particular pixel space. Again, I have to save my my changes, but that's a very cool little shortcut to create opmons and scaled outputs, as well as duplicate any, if you want the parameters of one output to be copied to another output, okay? Let me see, let me go back to this one. Yeah, Joel. Joel's feeding me the questions.
Did you talk about the config monitor?
The config monitor, yes. The wrench?
Yep.
I did.
Okay.
I'll briefly talk about it again, very briefly. So remember, when you set up your multi-viewer, you're going to want, when you bring in your sources, you're going to want to be able to view them and on a monitor instead of having them go up on the main screen and freak everybody out. So if you right click on any fourth output, now I don't know if it'll let you put it on every one of them. I think I would have known this by now. Yeah, it's got to be either on the, oh yeah, that's any output, right? I tend generally make a rule of just keeping it on my multi-viewer, and now I've got my multiple outputs here. There we go, I just got to update it. So once that wrench is set, that means anytime I go into a source configuration mode, when I go to configure a source, it's going to temporarily appear on this output, okay? So again, just that should be part of your normal setup when you're going file new, you're building your configuration, you're building your pixel spaces, you're mapping your outputs, choosing all those things, and when you apply it, you can't do that in the file new menu, right? You don't do it from here. You have to apply the config, then go into the system patch, right click and say set as output, set as configuration output, okay? There is some other stuff, there's other things loaded in here called show opmon overlay. That is a 300 series term, okay? And to my knowledge, that has not been implemented in Studio or in X20. So that's where you would actually see the layer number on the operator monitor. If you can dig out an old 300 series, it's actually kind of a cool feature that you could see it there. You can load on the output side, sorry, I was kind of scooting through this. You can load an unscaled image directly to an output. Let me cancel this real quick. Meaning take an output and load it directly to that, load an image and load it directly to that output, unscaled. So if it doesn't match the resolution, you'll see it. It'll be either overscanned or underscanned or something like that. The other cool thing here is identify. So if I click on identify output 16, you're not going to be able to see it here because I don't have a physical output to show you. But what it'll do is it'll flash the output number on the physical output screen. Okay, so if you have 5, 10, 15, or whatever, however many monitors, and you want to know which output is driving each monitor, you can say right here, right click and do just the individual output, or you can do all of them, and it'll slowly just put up a number, what output number it is, for 5 seconds, and then just come off the screen. Okay, you also have that function right here in the layers as well. So if I had a layer on the screen, let me unlock these two down here. And if I were to put just a few layers on the screen here, now it doesn't really make sense to see this in the simulator because the layer numbers are right there. But if I were to go right here and say identify, you'll see how it puts in a layer number. Now I get a weird little kind of graphic thing. That's probably an offline thing, but it flashes up the number. So if you have a look on the screen, you're not sure which layers you're using, or maybe you just want to quickly have someone show what layers are being used on the screen, that's a good way to show it, and it'll put up the numbers for each ones that are on there. Okay. Anything else out there? Scaled output on X20. Let me toggle back to X20 for a second. Here's the cool thing about X20, okay? Even though X20 doesn't have the multi-viewer, okay, it's not configurable, and that we'll get into that on Wednesday. The X80 has very specific outputs that's capable of, right? In the X20, all of the outputs support all of the modes, okay? You don't have to worry about which output it needs to be your operating on. You can pick which one. They're not restricted in that way. The only restriction on the outputs is whether or not they support dual link or not, okay? So remember that on the X20, outputs 1, 3, 5, and 7 support dual link resolutions, okay? And that's really the only parameter that I can think of other than stereo sync, right? There's a specific output where you would direct the sync. But otherwise, any output on the X20 can support scaled output, operator monitor, or source monitor. Okay, you just simply go into the output, go to the mode, and you'll see all these different modes here. Some are stereoscopic specific. But also you'll see the wrench as well. It's a little bit different of a wrench, but there it is, okay? So any output can support any mode in X20 with the exception of dual link, and X80, we'll make that slide available to everybody so you know which outputs support which modes, okay? What else? I think we may be good. Anybody else? So later much. Yeah, so there is a setting in here. I just gotta find it. Where you can choose the direction in which layer is in the patch, what order, if you want top to bottom versus is it one at the top or 24 at the top as far as the system patch. You can't change the order of the layers, but that's that. Yeah, Joel, sorry. Anything?
What's up?
All right, I was just checking to see if we had any more.
I think you've got everything answered here. And I think the order is flipped in the advanced tab there and the tools properties. That's where you can change your.
Oh, down here.
Down in there.
Let me collapse these. Yeah, if you get into this advanced tab in the tools options menu, there's lots of little granular settings in here that you really have access to in the GUI. Just gotta find, where would you invert that order? I know there's probably a bunch of people, it's right there, you missed it, but you can do it. And you know, I try to, when these are done, I try to edit them real quick and take out some of the ums and ahs and put in some call outs. I'll find it and let you know where to find that particular setting. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, we'll wrap it up a little early. Remember that we're going to do the multi-viewer on Wednesday, and I think we're actually going to have a real spider to show you the outputs of that. If you guys have any suggestions on other topics, like I said, we're reaching out to some people regarding panelists, so we may invite some people in if they want to talk maybe more specific in a specific area that they think may be beneficial to other operators. You can do that as well. I see one last question. We often need to send widescreen program to the backstage or overflow HD monitor. Can we just drag X20 alt program with widescreen destination to be any odd output and should be good? X20, I think you're just saying you just want to see a specific pixel space to a specific output. That would be a scaled output, I believe, right? I think that's it. And as I look at questions here,
the recommendation for MST Hub is that we use Club 3D is a display port hub, 1 in 4 out is what we've tested with.
Yep.
The Trip Lite also makes a HDMI MST hub if you need to be HDMI. And those are the two that we've used and implemented, but there are many others out there. Any concerns, you can literally send it to us and we'll test it.
Yeah, the other one out there that's not quite necessarily compact or anything is that DataPath FX4, which has been doing a lot of that heavy lifting for the X20 to help break up 4K signals into the X20 and the other direction as well. So I really appreciate you guys coming out to watch. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me directly at peter.kaiser@christiedigital.com, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Okay, thanks guys.